So now I'll be talking to you about the rules of debit and credit. But before that, we should know that there is no standard definition for debit and credit. According to history, if we go by the history, debit had been derived from a Latin word called debere, which means to owe. And later on, it was shortened to dr. Similarly, credit was also derived from a Latin word called credere, which meant on which one believes. So it was also later on, turned into CR or shortened to CR. So debit was shortened to DR and credit was shortened to CR. So in spite of all this, debit and credit are the operators of accounting, which operate on the subject of accounting. So debit and credit represent two sides of an account. That is, one is the debit side and the next one is the credit side. The debit or DR is to make an entry on the left side, while the credit or CR is to make an entry on the right side. So nowadays, the accountants have adopted such ways of keeping records, which are not only used on a long-term basis, but are also useful for the management in many decision makings. So let me tell you about the rules of debit and credit. The financial transactions result in increasing or decreasing the value of various individual accounts in a ledger. So the rules of debit and credit are applied to record these increments or decrement in the individual ledger accounts. So first of all, I'll tell you about the rules for an asset account, the debit and credit rules for an asset account. So assets are recorded on the debit side of the account. Any increase to an asset is recorded on the debit side, and any decrease is recorded on the credit side of the account. For example, the amount of cash in hand at the first day of the accounting period is recorded on the debit side of the account. Whenever amount of cash is received, an entry is made on the debit side of the cash in hand account. So whenever similarly, when an amount of cash is paid out, an entry is made on the credit side of the cash in hand. So now I'll be talking to you about the rules for liability accounts. Liabilities are recorded on the credit side of the account. Any increase in liability is recorded on the credit side, and any decrease is recorded on the debit side for a liability account. For example, the amount payable to, suppose, United Traders on the first day of the accounting period is recorded on the credit side of United Traders account. If more goods are brought or bought from United Traders, an entry would be made on the credit side of the United Traders account. If an amount is paid to the United Traders, an entry will then be made on the debit side of the United Traders account. Now the rule for capital accounts. Capital is recorded on the credit side of the account. So any increase is also recorded on the credit side, and any decrease will be recorded on the debit side, irrespective of the capital account. For example, the amount of capital for, suppose, Ram on the first day of accounting period will be shown on the credit side of Ram's capital account. If he introduces any additional capital, an entry will be made on the credit side of the capital account. And if he takes any money or good from the business for his personal use, that will reduce his capital, and therefore the entry will be made on the debit side of his account. Now the rule for expense accounts. An expense is a loss and therefore results in decrease in capital. Since a decrease in capital is recorded on the debit side of an account, all the expenses are also recorded on the debit side of the relevant account. So hence, when a salary is paid to the workers, we make an entry on the debit side of the salaries account. Usually, but not always, there will be no entries made on the credit side of the accounts kept for expenses. Now, the rules for income or revenue account. An income or revenue results in increase of capital. Since increase in capital are recorded on the credit side of the capital account, all incomes are recorded on the credit side of the relevant account. Hence, when we receive any rent from a tenant, we make an entry on the credit side of the rent income account. Usually, but not always, there will be no entries made on the debit side of the accounts kept for incomes and revenues. Now, let me summarize this for you. For debits and credits, what all things are kept on the debit side and what all things on the credit side. First of all, let me tell you the things that are kept on the debit side. On the debit side, we keep the opening balances of assets. Also, we keep addition to any assets or addition to expenses or reduction in liabilities and capital. We also keep the reduction in income and revenue. So things that are added in assets and expenses are kept on the debit side, while the reduction in liabilities and capitals or income and revenue are also kept on the debit side. On the contrary, on the credit side, opening balances of liabilities and capitals are kept. Addition to any liabilities or capitals are kept, and similarly, addition to income and revenue is also kept on the credit side. Like I said, there will also be reductions recorded in the credit side. So reduction in assets and expenses will be kept under the credit side of the account.